One of the things that I really enjoy about looking back at old art journals is seeing the repetitions that happen in my journal. So whether it's colors, patterns, certain textures or ideas that I'm working with, it's really interesting when I go back that certain times in my life, it seems like I'm like attached to the same patterns of things. So those repetitions are showing up. So this particular journal was from like back in 2010, but you can see these same colors that show up on the cover show up on the inside page as well, these blacks and whites, which anyone who like has been doing this with me for a while, this is different, right? I don't usually work in really dark tone, and yet we see that continue onto these pages as well. So, and you'll also notice too, right, not just the colors, but some of the same techniques. So like here, there's these stamped in little butterflies. There's this sort of square pattern here. And then when we open up in here, again, I've got all these like rectangles and squares happening. And these are also stamps, the birds. And the vines in through here are also rubber stamps. So it's sort of this acknowledgement of this pattern that was happening at this particular time in my life. And what's really interesting too is knowing for myself that it was a time where I was moving through a lot of transitions in my life. I had lost my mother in 2007, and then my son was born in 2008. And, you know, as you can imagine, grieving new mother, I didn't go to my art journal a whole lot. And so this was one of the first like new journals that I had started after that time period. And so there's these really dark tones as I'm like starting to come back in to my own creative expression. And then I think it's really interesting, like the next page becomes this total transition page where we still see these blacks, repetition of spirals, of rubber stamps, and then the colors begin to emerge again. And they continue on in various forms throughout my journal. It's so just interesting to me to observe things like this, because so often in our lives we get so busy with just the forward motion that we don't take the time to notice what are the patterns that are happening in my life? What are the things that I'm sort of on automatic mode? I'm repeating over and over again. And maybe some of those things serve me, maybe some of them don't serve me anymore. And it's time to move on, right? Time to move from one color palette to another, or move from one technique to another in our art. But of course, that relates to our own lives as well. So today I am inviting you to look at the theme of harmonies, of repetition, and where those are serving us in our lives, and where we're ready to create some new patterns as well. So for those who are joining us for the first time, maybe online, hello, I am Jen. I am your host of Creative Spirit Gathering. And this is our place for using art journals to explore what is on our minds and hearts. And today I'm going to be leading you in to a bit of a creative way of looking at our own life journeys, our spiritual journeys, today with a focus on the concept of self-care. And I'll also be sharing with you some tips for how to create repetition in your journal as we're looking at those conscious awareness moments, this conscious awareness of where repetition is serving your life and where you want to perhaps increase certain things in your life. So last week, if you missed the video, go back and check it out. But for those of you who were here last week, we talked about that the idea of our personal core, right? What is the core of my being and what am I to focus on right now? So if you were with us, I want you to take into mind that idea of what that answer was for you last week. What is my core? What am I to focus on right now? Because that's going to really play into this idea of the repetitions that are serving us or the repetitions that aren't, and how we might want to create new patterns in our lives, new patterns that are going to really support the core of who we are as we're leaning more deeply into our own self-care awareness. Now, for some of us, um, when we think about attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, and thoughts, even the words that we use, we might think, oh, well, last week I thought about what my core is, and I figured out, my core is to focus on my spiritual practice right now. And so that's it, I'm done. I figured it out. Or maybe we said, okay, well, I figured out that it's to focus on my spiritual practice, so I'm going to pray more. So I prayed once last week, right? So I'm done. But in reality, it's not a one and done kind of thing. It's a repetition that builds up the core of who we are. So if we were wanting to focus on our spiritual awareness, we're wanting to focus on deepening our prayer life, really, we're going to want to pray every day. We're going to want to include it every day in different ways as well. So it might not always look exactly the same. If we pull this back to our bodies, right? Something that's like tangible. I can look at that. I can look at, the health blogs and figure out, okay, well, eating vegetables is healthy for me. And I want to focus on my health. So I want to eat more vegetables. Again, I'm not just going to eat a salad once. Maybe I'm going to commit to adding vegetables every day to my lunch. Maybe it's a salad today, some carrot sticks tomorrow, some broccoli spears the next day, right? So we're creating some variation while at the same time leaning into repetition, because it is this repeating of what we believe, right? Who we're saying, this is who I am, repeating and claiming these things for ourselves that can help to truly like rewire our brain, right? It's got all these like little grooves and those pathways that are set in place after so many years of us doing things a certain way, right? Maybe we always had chips with our lunch instead of vegetables. And so now we need to like reframe it to do something a little bit differently. And again, if we do it one time, it's not going to stick. It's this repetition that helps us to form new habits in our life. And those habits, again, can be around our thoughts and our beliefs, because we might be holding some belief that tells us that we can't do something, that tells us that our past is limiting us in some way from what we're wanting to create in our future. So it's important to notice what those things are and those old patterns and old ways of doing things that might not be serving us, and create new patterns to replace them. Now, again, off the bat, you might be like, well, I don't even know. What are the patterns? What are the things that I want to put into place? And that's where our journals become really valuable tools. It becomes a place where you can simply rest with an idea while you're moving art materials around, right? It's not about the finished product. It's about being present with the process. And as we're doing that and doing something simple like stamping repetitive motions, doing the same patterns on the page, right, over and over, that repetition becomes something that's so simple for our mind to digest what we're doing on the page. It gives us space for our thoughts and our emotions then to start processing in the background. So while we're smearing our paint around, while we're stamping repetitions with our rubber stamps, we're also allowing the space for the ideas to process. So as we go into our journal with an intention, asking, what are the patterns that no longer serve me? What are the patterns that are going to be helpful as I'm moving into living into the core of my being right now? And as we're asking those questions, I guarantee you that the answers will start to bubble up. It's sort of the magic of the art journal process of any expressive arts. As we give ourselves space to rest into an idea, then we receive the answer if we are willing to receive. So I shared with you that this particular page was done with some rubber stamps. You can see my proof of stampage here that goes with the little birds. Other things you could do to create repetitions in your journal could be something like a stencil. Now this is like a cardboard cutout. So I could put this on my page and then paint up around the edges of it so it will leave the negative of the butterfly on the page and I can pull it off. I could also paint my butterfly and stick it on the page, rub over the top, and then I'll have a print. So we can create our own prints with cardboard. We could do prints with found things in our recycle bins. This is like an orange juice topper that probably something very similar was used on the cover of my journal. You can see those circles here were printed out using various tops and just dipped in acrylic paint. I've also shared with you before my love of coffee holders for their textures. This one's got a really interesting pattern on it. So again, I could put paint or ink on here and use it to stamp onto the page. And we can also do the opposite of my butterfly stencil, which is to have something that we're painting or drawing on the inside of. This happened to be from a board game. When you punch out all the little pieces, we save those and then stick them in the studio, and they create some fun textures and patterns on the page as well. So I invite you to sort of play with this in terms of what you want to use to create your repetitions. Of course, you could draw them, right? You could just draw spirals over and over and over again, and you're getting that same sense of just leaning into that repetitive motion that allows the mind the space to begin to open up, to process, and let those divine wisdom ideas come through for you. Making sure I touched on all the notes that I had for you today, and I think I have. So our primary things are that we want to look at how does repetition in our lives, right? Our activities, our beliefs, our thoughts, how do the repetitions serve us in leaning into our core truth and leaning in to how we really want to show up in the world. And then using simple art materials such as stamps or stenciling. And again, you could use ink for this or acrylic paints to create this sense of repetition on the page while you're leaning in to the question and listening for those inner answers to bubble up for you. So we're going to take these ideas into meditation. Anyone who may have joined us late, I'd be happy to check in with you in the chat. Make sure you've got the topic for the day, so we will not leave you to your journal without a little bit of help. So I invite you, wherever you are, to join me in a moment of meditation. And this may look like closing your outer eyes fully if that feels comfortable for you, or you may wish to find something in your periphery vision to just soften your gaze to focus on. So we'll take a moment. I always like to just notice the body first. Roll out my shoulders, maybe shift my neck from side to side, or even shift my hips in the seat. taking that moment to let the body fully sink into the present moment. And then begin bringing your awareness to your breath, letting the breath be a gentle tool that helps you move into the flow, the rhythm of this now moment. Letting whatever has come before just simply rest a moment. Any thoughts in the mind, we invite them to still, knowing they have a place to express on the page in just a moment. And as we continue to focus on the breath, imagine breathing into your heart space. Notice the heart expanding and opening. I invite you to rest for a moment of silence in the open, peaceful space of your heart. What beliefs and activities and words most serve you in being the highest expression of yourself right now? I invite you to explore this in your journal today as we take a moment right now to give thanks for the wisdom of the heart, the wisdom of the spirit that guides us through our process as we move and explore from our heart and our mind through our hands onto the page. Thank you, Spirit, for this opportunity. And as we open our eyes into this now moment, I invite you to move into your journal practice, exploring through repetition the ideas, the beliefs, the thoughts, the actions that most serve your own highest expression at this time in your life. Enjoy the process.